Good morning. I welcome the members, staff, and a treasure trove of guests today. I've counted. I think there are 13 lawyers in this room, aside from the ones at this table. Not a lucky number, but I like rooms full of lawyers. I always have. It's terrific. I'm glad you all could be here. We look forward to hearing from you. We have lots of proposed financings today, so we've got a lot of business to conduct. We're going to have 3 closed sessions today, which is unusual for us. They will be very brief. We'll see how that works out. And we have 1 member who has to leave plus or minus 12:30, so I expect we'll be done long before then. But just keep your eye on the clock as we get to that number, to that time. We'll start with tab 1, the minutes behind tab 1. Minutes are always, in my view, excellent. They really do reflect what we do here, and they do it in probably the most succinct way possible, and I want to thank staff for that. Well done. Are there any proposed revisions, any corrections? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve? Gerard, thank you very much. Is there a second? Thank you very much, Bill. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
The Finance Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We met yesterday afternoon in New York City and also by video conference in Albany. We just reviewed one proposed financing, which is the school district revenue bond financing program, which is behind tab 8. And after some discussion, we unanimously recommend that be approved at today's board meeting. We also then reviewed the Finance Committee charter. There were no changes from last year, and that was also unanimously actually approved by the Finance Committee. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Any questions? Hearing none, we're going to propose our first executive session. May I have a motion, please, to go into executive session to discuss the financial and credit and history of particular corporations, proposed, pending, or current litigation, and the employment history of particular persons or matters leading to the employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of particular persons. A motion. Thank you very much, Wellington. A second. Joe, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are in closed session. Sorry. Thank you, Kim. The record will reflect that we've just left the closed session during which no decisions were made other than to return to the public. We're going to move to the adoption of financing documents. Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to everyone. Behind tab 3 is the Catholic Health System Obligated Group transaction summary update with bond counsel Neil Kaplan, Esquire Hawkins, Delafield, and Wood, with Gerard Clauser giving a brief update.
Neil, good to see you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Transaction summary update and staff report provided to the members is seeking the adoption of documents for the Catholic Health System Obligated Group. The material updates since the approval of the resolution to proceed received February 2016 are the variable rate bonds, which are going to be issued. CHS has decided to issue variable rate demand bonds with a direct pay letter of credit as a security through M&T Bank. M&T Bank will also serve as the remarketing agent for the variable rate demand bonds. The finance contingencies related to any CONs and any other projects have been met. CHS is a fully integrated healthcare system and is expected to add the following members to the obligated group through this financing: Mount St. Mary's Hospital of Niagara, Macaulay Seton Home Care Corporation, Niagara Homemaker Services Incorporated. The approvals received. Resolution to proceed was received February 6, 2019. We received PACB approval on February 20th, 2019. The TEFRA hearing is scheduled for March 21, 2019, and our SEQR review was completed on March 4th. And staff requests the board adopt the bond documents for the Catholic Health System Obligated Group in an amount not to exceed $220 million.
Thanks, Gerard. Good morning. Before you for consideration this morning is the adoption of a general resolution authorizing the issuance of one or more series of Catholic Health System Obligated Group revenue bonds pursuant to series resolutions also to be adopted by the authority. We'll refer to Catholic Health System as CHS, just to make this go a little bit more quickly today. Also before you are two series resolutions, each authorizing a series of bonds under the general resolution. Each series resolution authorizes the issuance of up to $220 million of revenue bonds. However, the issuance of bonds under one series resolution would equally reduce the amount of bonds that could be issued under the second series resolution. So the aggregate amount of bonds that could be issued under the two resolutions to be presented to you today is $220 million. The Series 2019 A bonds are to be issued as multimodal bonds in a fixed rate mode. The bonds are subject to mandatory tender at any time that the bonds are also subject to optional redemption, and bonds purchased pursuant to the mandatory tender may be converted to another fixed rate mode or a variable rate interest mode. The Series 2019 B bonds are proposed to be issued initially in a variable rate, in a weekly mode, and are to be supported by a direct pay letter of credit to be issued by manufacturers and traders trust company. The bonds are expected to be sold pursuant to a negotiated sale to Bank of America Merrill Lynch, which will then offer the bonds to the public. Pursuant to a loan agreement between the authority and CHS, the proceeds of the bonds will be loaned to CHS to pay or reimburse members of the CHS obligated group for costs of capital projects, and to refund two series of bonds that were issued by the authority for members of the CHS obligated group in 2006 and 2008. CHS is the sole member and cooperator of Mercy Hospital Buffalo, Sisters of Charity, Hospital of Buffalo, New York, Buffalo, New York, and Mercy Hospital and Mount St. Mary's Hospital, Niagara Falls, which together with CHS will own and operate substantially all of the property to be financed and refinanced with proceeds of the bonds. Bond proceeds will also be used to finance an electronic an EHR system, an electronic health record system, which will be used by CHS and its affiliates. The loan agreement provides for CHS to make payments to the bond trustee sufficient to pay the principal and interest and the redemption and purchase price of the bonds when due. The obligations of CHS under the loan agreement, together with the payment obligations of all other bonds issued pursuant to the general resolution, will be secured by, among other things, obligations to be issued by the CHS obligated group pursuant to a master indenture that was entered into in 2006. In connection with the issuance of the bonds, the members of the obligated group will execute and deliver a supplemental master indenture with respect to each series. While the bond counsel letter notes that these obligations are expected to be the 12th and 13th obligations, I just need to correct that to note that they'll be actually the 14th and 15th obligations issued under the master indenture. It's expected the master indenture will be amended and restated at or shortly after the issuance of the bonds. The members of the obligated group, as Gerard had mentioned, are currently the three hospitals, Mercy Hospital Buffalo, Sisters of Charity Hospital, and Kenmore Mercy Hospital. It's expected that that shortly after the issuance of the bonds, Mount St. Mary's Hospital of Niagara Falls and certain other affiliates will also become members of the obligated group. The members of the obligated group will each pledge and grant a security interest in their gross receipts to secure their obligations to make required payments under the master indenture, and gross receipts does not include certain gifts and other contributions and items as set forth in the master indenture. Also, certain members of the obligated group did grant mortgages in connection with supplemental obligations to the master indenture, which were issued in 2012 and 2015. Those mortgages will also secure the 2019 obligations. However, those obligations, the mortgages, will only be in place so long as the 2012 and 2015 obligations remain outstanding. In addition, each obligated group member will agree to set rates and charges for their facilities and services so as to maintain a long-term debt service coverage ratio of not less than 1.1 to 1, and they'll also agree to limitations on their rights to issue additional debt, encumber property, merge or consolidate with other entities, and dispose of their assets. The general resolution provides for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds on behalf of the members of the CHS obligated group. Each series of bonds under the general resolution will comprise special obligations of the authority payable solely out of the revenues pledged for such series of bonds, which consist primarily of payments made by the applicable members of the obligated group under the related loan agreement, required payments by members of the obligated group under the supplemental obligation for such series, and amounts realized upon the liquidation of any collateral securing those obligations, as well as the funds and certain of the funds and accounts held for such series. The general resolution does authorize the establishment of a debt service reserve fund. However, no reserve is expected with respect to the 2019A or 2019 bonds. Again, as I mentioned, there will be two series resolutions, and each series resolution delegates to authorized officers of the authority the ability to make certain determinations with respect to each series of bonds. Generally, the typical authorizations that you see in each of these resolutions. I did want to highlight, though, that with respect to the Series 2019 B resolution, it's substantially identical to the 2019 A, other than with respect to series designation, and it also has what we think of as the typical provisions relating to variable rate bonds, including treating appointing manufacturers and traders trust company as the provider of the direct pay letter of credit with respect to the initial issuance of the bonds. Each series resolution also establishes funds and accounts for such series. With respect to the Series 2019 B bonds, there will also be funds and accounts that are typically appropriate for variable rate weekly floating bonds. An authorized officer is also authorized to execute a loan agreement, bond purchase agreement with respect to each series, distribute a preliminary official statement, execute and deliver an official statement with respect to the bonds, and execute and deliver such other instruments and documents as are deemed necessary in connection with the issuance of the bonds and the refunding of the refunded bonds. If there are any questions, happy to take them.
First of all, thank you both. Are there questions for Neil or Gerard? Sir.
The gatekeeper for additional members to the obligated group is the Department of Health later on?
I can try to answer that. I think and bond counsel can correct me, the master trust indenture will specify how members can be added to the obligated group, but what's noted in the staff report is that the department's regulations 600.9 require that any entity to share in the revenues of other entities has to be established by the Public Health and Health Planning Council. Therefore, there were some additional members that CHS was desiring to have join the obligated group, which we've communicated that would have to go before this body in order to be.
Just someone will at least.
That's right.
Check this after the fact.
Right.
That's correct.
And the other one I had was just Niagara Homemaker Services Inc. What do they do?
They are actually a home health care agency that's an affiliate of Mount St. Mary's Hospital of Niagara Falls. It's not anticipated that that they will be a recipient of bond proceeds under this issue, although they may have the ability to use the electronic medical record system, just like other affiliates of CHS.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Are there other questions, comments? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Thank you, Tracy. Second? Carol, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. With none opposed, the motion carries unanimously. The transaction's approved. Thank you both.
Thank you.
John, it's out. Are you able to hear everybody?
Yes, the sound quality is excellent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And that was a Buffalo deal there, John.
It did. I noted that. I was cheering in the background quietly.
I was waiting for some comment, but I was disappointed.
Thank you. Behind tab 4 is the Cornell University summary update with bond counsel Damon Pace, Esquire, Ulrich Harrington, and Sutcliffe, with David Ostrander providing an update. Thank you. You heard that too, John?
Yes, I heard that. We're good.
Good.
David? Good morning, Damon. See you both.
Just had a brief update. As Damon will describe, we're asking the board to adopt 4 series resolutions for Cornell University. The members may recall back in December of 2017, we came to the board for a resolution to proceed for certain new money refunding and refinancing transactions on behalf of Cornell for an amount not to exceed $1.25 billion. You might recall at that time there was some uncertainty with regard to tax law changes and private activity bonds as well as advanced refunding, so there was a number of items that Cornell included in that approval. What we're coming to the board now for is the adoption of documents for what essentially is the first and second phase of this overall plan of finance. So the first phase will include the refunding of Cornell's 2009 A bonds and the refinancing of tax-exempt commercial paper that it was issued by DASNY. That phase will come through 3 separate series. The first series will be a public offering of fixed-rate bonds. That'll be right around $100 million. The second series will be a public offering of variable rate demand bonds, also around $100 million. And then the third series will be variable rate bonds that will be privately placed with TIA Bank or its affiliate. That amount will be around $85 to $100 million. All 3 of those series are expected to close simultaneously. The second phase, which is expected to occur later this year, will provide new money financing for Cornell's North Campus residential expansion, which will create up to 2,000 new undergraduate beds, together with supporting dining, parking, recreational, and supporting infrastructure. So, just to summarize, of the $1.25 billion that we came to the board with in December of 2017, the amount associated with this financing that we're asking the board to adopt documents for will be $610 million.
Thanks, Dave. As Dave mentioned, the purposes of the 4 series that we're presenting for consideration this morning, essentially the first 3 is a refunding, 1 series of bonds and the tax-exempt CP, and 1 new money series for later in the year. The series resolutions themselves are identical just for efficiency, but the purposes will be laid out as Dave mentioned. While we are coming to market, Cornell wanted to sort of modernize and streamline some of the provisions in their resolution and their loan agreement. So we also are presenting for consideration a supplemental and amendatory resolution to the general resolution, and again, the amended and restated loan agreement. The changes are relatively minor, but just to highlight for the supplemental resolution, some of the things we're doing is provide flexibility to determine payment dates other than January and July 1. We're removing provisions regarding certain optional newspaper publications and deleting the 30-day waiting period from effective. In addition, we're also allowing for certain provisions such as conditional notice of redemption and consent of a facility provider providing credit facility in lieu of consent of bondholders. For the amended stated loan agreement, some of the highlights for those changes are removal of covenants relating to the engagement of a management consultant, removal of specific insurance requirements, and a more streamlined requisition process. So these changes won't trigger with this issuance. We need majority consent, and we're still a little ways off. Cornell has indicated that they plan on refunding additional series, so we may trigger soon. In addition, we're getting the underwriters and the existing direct purchase holder to vote, and Cornell expects similar voting for additional series. Lastly, at closing, we'll go ahead and send out sort of the request for consents to see if we can pick up some consents from existing bondholders. But that is essentially what is happening. We've got refunding in 3 pieces and amending 2 of the underlying documents.
David, thank you. Are there questions for David? Hearing none, before I call for a vote, I think it appropriate to disclose that my wife is a professor at Cornell, Weill Cornell Medical School. I don't think that requires a recusal, and so I'm not going to offer one.
And I would agree with that.
Thank you very much.
Disclosure
what
is
it's
great.
worth.
Yeah,
For what it's worth. That's exactly
the disclosure has been made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. May I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Thank you very much, Jerry. Is there a second? Errol, thank you. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. The transaction is approved. Thank you both.
Okay, thank you. Behind tab 5 is the Interagency Council of Developmental Disabilities Agencies, Inc. transaction summary update with co-bond counsel Melissa Bennett, Barclay Damon, LLP, and Justin Marouse of the Marouse Law Group, and Gerard Clauser providing an update.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, transaction summary update and staff report provided for the members for the adoption of documents for the Interagency Council of Developmental Disabilities. The transaction will include tax-exempt and or taxable, fixed and or variable rate bonds, in one or more series of one or more times through a negotiated sale or private placement. The purpose of the financing is to refinance existing bank loans and reimburse certain institutions for cash expenditures which are used to renovate or acquire certain properties. On a program level, this will be the 13th financing for the Interagency Council. This is a pooled financing with 6 participants. It will be for a term to not to exceed 26 years and an amount not to exceed $31 million. Each borrower will have their own loan agreement. Prior property approvals are in place for all 48 proposed projects. There are no material changes in this transaction report since our resolution to proceed. The approvals, we received the resolution to proceed on January 9th, 2019. The PACB approval on January 16th, 2019. Our TEFRA hearing was held February 14, 2019, and our seeker was completed January 30. We received Moody's ratings of AA2 on March 1, 2019. Staff requests the board adopt documents for the Interagency Council of Developmental Disabilities for a term not to exceed 26 years in an amount not to exceed $31 million.
Thank you, Gerard.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Before you is a proposed series resolution authorizing up to $31 million of Interagency Council Pooled Loan Program Revenue Bonds under the IAC Pooled Loan Program Revenue Bond Resolution adopted in 2010. That general resolution authorizes DASNY to issue multiple series of bonds to help the nonprofit members of IAC finance facilities serving people with developmental and other disabilities. DASNY loans the proceeds of each issue to one or more IAC members for their facilities, and DASNY enters into a separate loan agreement with each participant. Each series of IAC bonds is separately secured by the payments to be made by the participants under their respective loan agreements. IAC members receive most of their funding through state agencies, and each member in its loan agreement grants DASNY a security interest in such public funds relating to the facilities financed.
As Gerard indicated, the proposed bonds will finance approximately 48 project facilities for 7 IAC members under 6 loan agreements. One of the loan agreements will cover 2 IAC members that are affiliated to each other but operate as 2 separate legal entities. Each project facility is run by an IAC member licensed by one or more state agencies, including, in all of these cases, the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, or OPWDD. Proceeds of the bonds will also fund the debt service reserve fund and cost of issuance. The proposed bonds are currently contemplated to be issued as 2 subseries. The bonds will be special obligations of DASNY, payable solely from the revenues pledged to the bonds, which are primarily payments made under the applicable loan agreements. As Melissa mentioned, these payments will be secured by security interest in the public funds relating to each finance project. The bonds will also be secured by debt service reserve fund, expected to be 1/2 of the minimum annual debt service.
As described in our letter, and as Gerard indicated, all the projects have a prior property approval, or PPA, from OPWDD. The PPA evidences OPWDD's commitment to pay an amount approximately sufficient to amortize the project's portion of the bonds, subject to state appropriation and operation of the project to state standards. These payments constitute pledged revenue. Approximately 6 projects include those portions of project costs that are to be paid directly by the respective participant and will not be reimbursed by OPWDD, which costs total approximately $125,000. Additionally, 5 projects involve renovation costs that are not covered by a PPA, totaling approximately $342,000. All of these non-OPWDD reimbursed costs are anticipated to be paid out of the operating revenues of the respective participants. As additional security, DASNY will enter into intercept agreements so that upon an event of default by a participant, OPWDD will make their payments relating to the finance facilities to DASNY or the bond trustee as DASNY directs. To secure the respective participants' loans, approximately 18 project facilities will have mortgages in favor of DASNY, and approximately 26 project facilities that relate to the acquisition of co-op units will have security documents in favor of DASNY, similar to those typically entered into in a commercial loan with a co-op unit. For the approximately 4 leased properties, the participants will collaterally assign their respective leasehold interests to DASNY.
As we have noted, the bonds will be separately secured from all other series by the loans to the participants. These loans are not cross-collateralized with or cross-defaulted to other loans. If a participant defaults on a loan, the default will not constitute a default under loans made to the other participants, and only the defaulting participant's allocable portion of the bonds will be accelerated. If the amounts recovered through the security described above are insufficient to pay in full such portion of the bonds, those bonds shall nevertheless be deemed paid and shall be canceled by the trustee. In such an event, the default shall be deemed cured, and the affected bondholders shall have no further claim under those bonds. As described in our letter, the series resolution delegates to various officers the power, among others, to set the terms of the 2018 A bonds and to establish funds and accounts to be maintained by the trustee. The series resolution also authorizes the preparation, execution, and delivery as appropriate of customary documents for a negotiated public offering of the bonds. The bonds are expected to be sold on a negotiated basis to the Municipal Capital Markets Group pursuant to a bond purchase agreement in customary form. Do you have any questions?
Melissa, Justine, thank you. Gerard, thank you.
Are there questions?
Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Wellington, thank you. Thank you very much, Paul, for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. As there are none opposed, the motion carries unanimously. The transaction is approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Behind tab 6 is the Rockefeller University transaction summary update with bond counsel Virginia Wong Esquire, Nixon Peabody, with David Ostrander providing an update.
Good morning. I just have a very brief update before Virginia presents the documents. This is a transaction that we brought to the board last month for a resolution to proceed for an amount not to exceed $310 million. The purpose hasn't changed since last month. We'll be financing the river building, add 2 acres and several buildings to the university's campus, as well as refunding the 2009A, 2009C, and 2010A bonds. As Virginia will describe, those bonds will be issued over 4 series, and again, not to exceed $310 million. Virginia?
Good morning. You have before you for consideration 4 series resolutions to implement a series of financings for Rockefeller University that it requests the authority to undertake over the next 12 to 18 months. Each series resolution authorizes the issuance of a series of bonds. Each series resolution authorizes the issuance of up to $310 million of bonds under the authority's existing general bond resolution adopted for Rockefeller University. While each series resolution authorizes up to $310 million, they each also provide that the principal amount of bonds that may be issued under all of them cannot exceed $310 million in the aggregate. The bonds are being authorized to provide funds for a variety of capital improvements and for the refunding of bonds previously issued by the authority for the university. The university has requested that the authority adopt the 4 series resolutions at this time so that it can proceed with the refunding of the authority's Rockefeller University 2009A bonds and 2 other financings for capital improvements shortly after they're adopted, and then issue an additional series of bonds in calendar year 2020 to refund the authority's Rockefeller University Series 2010A bonds. All of the bonds to be issued pursuant to the series resolutions, like all other bonds issued under the general bond resolution, will be special obligations of the authority, payable from and secured by payments to be made by the university under the loan agreement entered into in connection with the other series of bonds under the general resolution. The loan agreement obligates the university to make payments in amounts and at times sufficient to pay the principal and redemption price of and interest on the bonds. University's obligations under the loan agreement are general obligations, and payments are to be made out of any source of funds available to the university. As is customary in your financing programs for highly rated institutions, university's obligations are not secured by a pledge of or a mortgage or security interest on any of the university's assets or property, nor the bonds secured by a debt service reserve fund. Each series resolution delegates to certain officers of the authority the power to determine the various financial and other terms of the bonds. Among the agreements authorized by the series resolution is an amended and restated loan agreement. As described in our letter, it is proposed that the loan agreement, which was originally entered into in 2002 and amended and restated in 2008, be again amended and restated in order to align the provisions of the loan agreement with current authority policy and more recent loan agreements of the authority. The amendments include the removal of covenants relating to the engagement of a management consultant and requirements relating to certifications of an insurance consultant and certain additional insurance coverage certifications. Under the general resolution, the amended and restated loan agreement will not become effective until the holders of a majority in principal amount of bonds outstanding give their consent to it. It is anticipated that the underwriters of the Series 2019 bonds and Series 2020 bonds will consent to the amendments on behalf of the holders of the 2019 bonds. The Series 2019 bonds will not constitute a majority in the aggregate principal amount of bonds to be outstanding, so a request will be sent to the holders of the bonds that will remain outstanding upon the issuance of the 2019 bonds, as is required by the general resolution. In order to authorize the issuance of bonds and the execution of the amended and restated loan agreement, you are requested to adopt the 4 series resolutions that are before you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you both. Are there questions? Oh, hearing none. May I have a motion, please, to approve the transaction? Wellington, thank you. Is there a second? Paul, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. It appears the motion carries unanimously. Transaction approved. Virginia, thank you.
Thank you.
And David, thank you.
Thank you. Behind tab 7 is the Terrence Cardinal Cook Healthcare Center with pro-bond counsel Christopher Leitzel, Esquire, Squire Patton Boggs, and Douglas Seaton, Esquire, D.C. and Associates, with Stephen Kozier providing an update.
Thank you. Good morning.
Welcome. Good morning.
Staff is requesting the board to adopt the necessary documents to be described by Kristen Douglas and made private placements with Terrence Cardinal Cook Healthcare Center as borrower and Sterling National Bank as the purchaser. The transaction is progressing well. The resolution to proceed was adopted at the February 6th board meeting. The ACB was approved on February 20th. The secret memo was filed yesterday, and the TEPA hearing is scheduled for March 13th. There's really no additional information of note. However, I do want to remind the board that there are expected to be 2 closings to allow the institution to draw down funds over a longer period of time, resulting in interest savings to the institution compared to if they were to issue the full amount of the bonds at the closing. The first closing is expected to occur in April, and the second closing is expected in 2019.
Before you for consideration is the adoption of the Terrence Cardinal Cook Healthcare Center Revenue Bond Resolution and 3 series resolutions authorizing individually and in aggregate $50 million of revenue bonds for the benefit of the institution. In order to provide flexibility for the institution with respect to structure and timing, we are being asked to authorize the issuance of up to 3 series of tax-exempt and taxable bonds or a combination thereof, which may be issued at one or more times. The institution currently anticipates 2 series of tax-exempt Series 2019 bonds pursuant to private placements with Sterling National Bank as purchaser. And as Steve just mentioned, the first series of bonds are expected to be issued in April to finance the cost of miscellaneous capital projects. The issuance of the second series is expected to occur later this year to finance the hospital relocation project. The institution currently expects both series to be issued initially as variable rate drawdown bonds. The bonds are expected to be subject to tender by the purchaser after 13 years, including a 3-year drawdown period. The general resolution provides for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds, each series separately secured from each other, except if otherwise provided in the applicable series resolutions. And the bonds of each series will be DASNY special obligations payable solely out of the revenues pledged therefor, funds and accounts established by the general resolution and the applicable series resolution, and by any other security pledged to the payment of such series of bonds.
The series resolutions delegate to various officers of DASNY the power to make the determinations described in our letter and to do all things necessary or convenient in connection with the sale and issuance of the bonds. In accordance with DASNY's guidelines, the series resolutions also contain restrictions on ownership and transfer of the bonds to qualified institutional buyers. DASNY and the institution will execute a loan agreement in connection with the issuance of the bonds, which will require the institution to make timely payment of debt service on the bonds. The institution's obligation to make payments on the loan agreement will be a general obligation. The institution will enter into a bond purchase and continuing covenants agreement or a similar agreement with the purchaser in connection with each issuance of Series 2019 bonds. A default under which will constitute a default under the related loan agreement. The purchaser is also expected to require a mortgage and a pledge of revenues. It is expected that DASNY's rights under the loan agreement and the mortgage will be assigned to the trustee, who will exercise remedies at the direction of the purchaser. The institution may be permitted by the purchaser to incur indebtedness, secured equally and ratably by the applicable pledged revenues and mortgage. In addition, the transaction documents may also contain certain financial covenants required by the purchaser. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Doug. Thanks, Chris. Steve? Other questions?
Just a quick one. Note there's no current rating on this series. If you're operating at a loss, I guess. So why is the rating is not listed?
For private placements, they don't need to go out and get a rating.
Thank you, Wellington. Are there other questions? There being none, may I have a motion, please, to approve this? Carol, thank you. Second? Tracy, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate aye. Aye. Is there none opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Transaction. Thank you all.
Thank you. Behind tab 8 is the school district's revenue bond financing program single approval transaction summary with co-bond counsel Connie Cow, Barclay Damon, and Gopalberger Ray LLP presenting along with David Ostrander.
Connie, Gopal, thank you for being here. You're up.
The board is being asked to adopt the necessary documents to authorize multiple series of tax-exempt and/or taxable bonds in an amount not to exceed $750 million. These bonds will be sold through one or more negotiated offerings on behalf of various school districts. Proceeds from this authorization may be used to refinance the bond anticipation notes or bands of various New York State school districts, to finance the new money projects on behalf of these districts, and to refund bonds issued by DASNY through the school district's revenue bond financing program. Participation in the pool is again expected to be high as interest rates rise in relation to the statewide average interest rate. So just to recap how building aid reimbursement works, if the school districts issue on their own, they'll receive building aid based on the statewide average. If they issue through DASNY, they'll receive their building aid based on the actual cost of borrowing. So with the statewide average lagging behind a year and being at 2.5%, when we're in an interest rate environment, it's beneficial for the districts to come through DASNY. So we saw that last year and we're seeing it again this year. And by the latest count, we're looking at 58 districts with a par amount of over 600 million. So last year was our largest pool ever. That was 580 million. So we're looking at being at or above that amount this year. As far as the structure and security, it will be the same as previous school district pools, which include semi-annual payments pursuant to a financing agreement backed by the full faith and credit general obligation bonds of the school districts, a statutory intercept through the state comptroller of any state aid due to the participating districts for debt service on DASNY bonds, as well as bond insurance if available and economically advantageous.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, you have before you for consideration for adoption the second supplemental resolution that authorizes the issuance of DASNY's fixed rate school district's revenue bond financing program revenue bonds in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $750 million in one or more series or sub-series pursuant to a master resolution that was adopted in February of 2018. As Dave said, the bonds will be used to finance or refinance capital projects and equipment for school districts throughout New York State. The master resolution provides for the issuance from time to time of multiple series of bonds in an unlimited principal amount. Each series of bonds under the master resolution is a special obligation of DASNY, payable solely out of certain revenues, which consist primarily of payments made by school districts on school district bonds issued to DASNY, and in the event a particular school district does not pay on its school district bonds by an intercept of state aid. Gopal will discuss both the school district bonds and state aid intercept in a moment. Each series of bonds issued under the master resolution is separately secured from all other series. This 2019 supplemental resolution before you is being adopted in order to provide sufficient series to close in mid-June the program for this year, which may have 58 or more school districts participating. As has been the practice in the past, DASNY expects to issue bonds under the supplemental resolution periodically, both in June and otherwise as demand requires, in order to provide school district with the ability to finance their capital needs in a timely manner. As described in our letter, the supplemental resolution delegates to various DASNY officers the power, among other things, to set the terms of the bonds and to establish funds and accounts to be maintained by the trustee. The supplemental resolution also authorizes the preparation, execution, and delivery of customary documents that will be in this form substantially similar to those used in past transactions. As has been the practice in the past, although the master resolution does not require that bonds issued be supported by credit enhancement, it is expected that one or more series may be enhanced by municipal bond insurance, since it has been historically cost-effective with respect to other series of outstanding bonds.
As with prior series of school district revenue bonds issued to finance or refinance projects for school districts, each school district will enter into a financing agreement with DASNY with the approval of the Commissioner of Education. Under the financing agreement, the school districts are obligated to make payments to DASNY in an amount sufficient to cover the principal and interest on the applicable series of bonds when due, regardless of whether the school districts receive state aid payments. In addition, each school district will issue bonds to DASNY backed by the full faith and credit pledge of such school district, which requires the school district to levy taxes in amount sufficient to enable the school district to pay the school district's bonds, securing its obligations under the financing agreement. The school district's obligation to make payments due under the financing agreements and other amounts due to DASNY under the financing agreements will be supported by statutory intercept mechanisms of the program established by Chapter 383. Neither the DASNY bonds nor the school district's obligations under the financing agreements are secured by a lien on any facilities of the school districts or on any other property and may not be accelerated as a remedy for default. The projects to be financed or refinanced with the proceeds of the district's revenue bonds will be identified in each financing agreement, and prior to the issuance of school district revenue bonds, will have each been approved by the voters of the school district and the Commissioner of Education. That concludes our presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much. Are there questions?
Yes, question. Is the not to exceed term 31 years, is that consistent with prior issuances under this program?
Yes. As always, for the record, I want to thank David for including this flow chart, without which I would have lost in the transaction. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Hearing none, may I have a motion please to approve the transaction? Wellington, thank you. Is there a second? No, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. Is there none opposed? The motion carries unanimously. The transaction is approved. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I make a comment?
Yes, of course. Please.
I just wanted to highlight that we have had a tremendous amount of activity today, and it's been a prolific day without pit and sales tax, I might add, and without NYU being part of the transaction. I might add. And we want more pit, we want more sales tax, and we want more NYU. We understand. But what I'm saying is that this is reflective of all of the work that the teams across all of DASNY have put in terms of simplifying our processes, making sure that we're more transparent, that we are really executing and focusing on time and cost of capital, as we have heard from our partners. And that is very important. We're continuing to hear more from the marketplace about relationships that had previously left us for a while and are seriously giving consideration to coming back. So I want to thank everyone inside of DASNY who's worked on this. And certainly I know Squire has left, but they were very essential to the work that we have had, and certainly Portia, Andy, in terms of really going out and continuing to deliver the message that what else can we do to ensure that New York State, through DASNY, works with these institutions. And we're going to see more hospitals, and as we saw when we did our analysis 2 years ago, the number in terms of issuances from hospitals collapsed because they were doing taxable work And so we had been talking about really combining taxable and tax exempt strategies into a portfolio. And we're starting to see discussions around that. So I just wanted to reaffirm that and highlight that. And say thank you.
Could not have said that. I will add that your willingness to go out into the market with staff, literally seek audiences with those former clients and current clients under the new One DASNY rubric certainly has added significantly to our visibility in the marketplace. And I think that's a very important thing. So thank you for that. Proceeding, going on, we will go to tab 9, the Corporate Governance Committee report. Chairman Johnson.
The Governance Committee met yesterday afternoon here in New York and Albany. Somebody was on the phone. We had did a number of things. First thing we did was adopt minutes of the previous meeting for October 9th, 2018. At this time, we have a series of required annual reviews of charters, performance measurements, all sorts of things. I'm going to ask Mike Cusack to go through those, because we're going to have to adopt 4 resolutions.
Thank you. And very, very briefly, the reviews that are conducted at this time of the year to satisfy corporate compliance requirements under New York State law can be broken into 2 general groups. First, the corporate governance materials, which include the Governance Committee Charter, the Governance Committee Principles, the mission statement and performance measures with the metrics to quantify performance goals, all as one document. And then fourth, the DASNY corporate bylaws. And staff completed a review of all 4 of those items. And with respect to the governance charter and the mission statement and metrics, staff recommended no changes. We had a discussion yesterday with the governance committee, who had a chance to comment, and they concurred with staff's recommendations. So there are no changes recommended to those 2 items. With respect to the governance principles, staff proposed minor clarifying changes to the governance principles, specifically at Section 3, subdivisions E, F, and G, which make reference to the Audit Committee, Governance Committee, and Finance Committee. And the clarifying changes essentially align the brief description of each committee with their respective chart. So that's the essence of those changes identified by Kim Nadow. Good catches. And Governance Committee had a chance to discuss that yesterday and agreed to recommend that to the board. There is a resolution in the book behind that we would need to act on, and we do recommend that.
Any question on that portion of this review? We'll hear a motion to accept. Second.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor, aye?
Aye. Thank you, Tex.
And the next item concerns the bylaws. Staff has prepared a proposed amendment to the bylaws at Section 4, Roman numeral 4, Section 4.2, to clarify that any person acting in the place of an authorized officer must be designated by either the DASNY board or an authority officer of DASNY. This clarification was recommended by Karen Ellinger, our manager of internal control, to work in tandem with other updated internal controls that she is implementing internally to maintain and publish on the DASNY intranet the list of parties currently authorized to act for and bind DASNY in accordance with bylaws section 4.2. In the discussion with the governance committee yesterday, the question came up on whether this was a new item or in reaction to something, or what type of a change it was, and this is to both update and conform to our existing practice. The existing practice that we had prior to this point in time of Karen making this proposal was completely manual. There was an authorized signatory binder on Debbie Dresser's desk, so if you had a contract, you had to call Debbie and find out if the person was listed. And in the interest of efficiency and all of the things we've been working on over the past year, we're making that a centralized internal posting. Karen's leading the charge on that, and this will help her make everything tie together. And with that, staff recommends it, and if you have any other comments, we have a resolution in the book for that as well.
Anybody have any questions on that? We did review these proposed changes and endorse them. There being none, may we have a motion, please, to approve the amendment?
Paul, thank you. Beryl, thank you for the second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Carries unanimously.
So the second category of things that we review annually at this time relates to policies and procedures, and it includes the code of conduct for members. Number 2, the whistleblower protection policy and procedure. Number 3, policy regarding payment of compensation and reimbursement to and time and attendance of senior management. And last, the guidelines pertaining to the disposition of certain real property. With respect to the code of conduct and the policy regarding compensation and attendance, staff completed a review of these documents and recommended no changes. We had the opportunity to discuss those with the governance committee yesterday, and the governance committee concurred. So there's no action required on these two. With respect to items that do require action, we've made some updates to the whistleblower protection policy and procedure that can be found on the table, and I'll explain to you the change from the version on the table versus what was in the book originally, because it's very, very minor. Let's talk about what the changes are first. We have a series of changes in the front end of the whistleblower protection policy that are first and foremost intended to conform the policy statement at the beginning to the definition of whistleblower and the reservation of rights that's at the very, very end. So no changes to those existing language, just bringing it up to make sure it's properly stated in the policy. Second, a series of changes related to the changes that we made within the last 12 months at the Office of Professional Integrity, which used to be known as Internal Affairs and was referenced as Internal Affairs throughout that policy. So you'll see a conforming change there to mention their new name, and then a practice change to conform to our practices, which relates to the review that occurs by one of the authorized persons under this policy who receives a complaint to first look at it and determine whether it's a whistleblower complaint versus some other sort of complaint, and then forward it through the process, because eventually it has to make it up to me and to Monica in ethics so that we can bring it to the board if we ever did receive a real or serious whistleblower complaint. And with that note being said, John and John Gardner and others identified that we should clarify that the whistleblower hotline, which is a phone line that gets answered by Tara Miner, who we've all met. She's come in and done a presentation. She's the director of OPI. That she personally monitored that hotline. So we've added that to the requirements. We don't think we've made a lot of substantive changes. We think it moves us in a positive direction, though, and makes the policy slightly better.
Including the black line version was very helpful for those of us who have difficulty keeping up.
And thank you. And I just want to note your change, Al. In the governance committee, yes. We took out the word adverse in front of personnel action under procedure letter A and procedure letter C as duplicative and unnecessary because personnel action is a defined term that stands by itself. And so the version that's on your table today, that's the only change difference from the book. It came up in the governance committee yesterday, so we revised it so that you have the actual changes in front of you. There is a resolution required for this, and it is in the book with the original materials, and we do recommend it subject to any comments from the chair and board members.
Are there any questions about changes that are proposed? John, are you still on the phone?
Yes, it always takes me a minute to hit the mic button, but I am, and Mike and I have talked about this subject at considerable length.
Terrific. Thank you for that. I know you can't vote, so you'll have to sit back and listen while I ask for a motion.
Fine.
While I ask for a motion to approve it. Thank you very much, Paul. John, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. There's no opposition. It carries unanimously.
Thank you. And the last item that requires board action is the guidelines for pertaining to the disposition of certain property. And this is more of a procedural requirement than anything else for 2019. Under New York State law, this particular set of guidelines must be reviewed annually by the board and acted on, and then we have to do a filing by March 31st with the Office of State Comptroller on these guidelines. So staff has completed a review of the guidelines in their current form. There are no recommended changes for this year. We had a chance to review that and discuss it with the governance committee yesterday, but however, even though there's no changes, this one actually does require a resolution so that we can make the filing with OSC. And subject to comments from the board today, we recommend that at the staff level that this be.
That resolution resides immediately behind the guidelines, for which there are no recommended changes. May I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution? Wellington, thank you. Is there a second? John, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye.
And that
Carries unanimously.
concludes my part of the presentation. Chair Johnson.
Thank you very much. I'm going to propose we go into an executive session for all the aforementioned reasons underlying my first request for executive session. May I have a motion, please, to approve an executive session? Thank you very much. All in favor? The record will indicate that we've just left a closed session during which no decisions were made except to return to the public session. We are now at tab 10. And we're ready for the president.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning, board members. We have several items to discuss today, including a history-making transaction and an update to one of our One DASNY initiatives. First, the Public Authorities Control Board has approved the design and construction plans for the new $750 million multi-purpose New York State Life Sciences Public Health Laboratory. On Wednesday, February the 20th, the PACB confirmed that the lab will be located at the W. Avril Harriman State Office Building campus in Albany. The state-of-the-art facility will function as a magnet for future private sector investment and public-private collaboration, accelerating innovation and value creation. DASNY is managing the design and construction of the project, which will be delivered using design build. We have issued a request for proposals to 3 teams selected to compete for the design build contract to help foster opportunities for minority, women, and small business and service-disabled veteran-owned business enterprises to participate in the project. DASNY is hosting an industry day with the 3 teams on Tuesday, March 26th from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. at Albany's Capitol Center. DASNY's longstanding partnership with NYU added yet another chapter earlier this month when NYU issued $862.8 million in bonds through DASNY. The $862.8 million is the largest private offering in DASNY's 75-year history. The financing will be used to advance and finalize construction and renovation projects across the university. The issuance includes more than $83 million in green bonds, providing investors with the opportunity to directly support projects that NYU has identified as environmentally sustainable. Green bond proceeds will go towards sustainable construction projects and equipment at NYU's 181 Mercer Street, 370 J Street, and the Langone Health Science Building. The $862.8 million issued by DASNY on behalf of NYU was offered as a $603.5 million tax-exempt series and a $259.3 million taxable series. Additionally, I'm very pleased to report that next year, 2 new investment bank partners will be selected to participate in this year's Public Finance Diversity Fellowship for graduating college students. We worked diligently with our senior underwriters to promote this extraordinary opportunity last year, and it was a resounding success. The 2 firms that partnered with us were RBC and Barclays. The fellowship is a full year position running from July the 1st, 2019 through June 30th, 2020. So the first year of this program, the first 6 months, the 2 fellows spent with us. They worked very closely with Portia and her team. And then for the subsequent 6 months, which includes today until June 30th, the 2 fellows are continuing work with RBC and Barclays and receive very stellar praise for their performance and their work. One of the advantages that we have been informed of that they bring is that they are given the opportunity to really have exposure very immediately to bond market activity, as well as the whole process of how we execute transactions and how we work with senior underwriters. So net, that is hugely important. They recognize that they may not be as numerically proficient as a number of their peers who start out in the training programs, but that evens out, as we have been told. And so what we're going to do is spend some time with the 2 partners who selected the RBC and Barclays to kind of figure out what else do we need to enhance skills so for the next group of young trainees or fellows that they're even better positioned. So the 2 investment banking partners will be once again selected by a lottery, and that will take place late March. And this is a fellowship that we have in place with the City University of New York, and they're very excited by this. Yeah, please.
You all have heard me say that I think that this fellowship is one of the finest ideas we've ever had here. These are young people who might not ever get the kind of exposure to the finance sector, the financial services sector, to banking. They might not ever get this kind of exposure except for this program. It can be life-changing for them. It can be transformational for them. It becomes the kind of experience that they remember and talk about for the rest of their lives, and it has gives them the distinct opportunity to work hard and to begin to perform in a sector about which they might not have of which they may have known nothing before they worked hard to get these 2 fellowships. So I don't know if you've met these people, the 2 that we have now. They are being evaluated constantly by the 2 banks for which they are working, and they're getting high marks and high praise. If we have the opportunity, they've been in board meetings, and I'd like to see them come back if they can break away from. They're working 12 to 15 hours a day, so they may not be able to come to one of our board meetings. But if you have the opportunity to meet these folk, talk to them, give them an opportunity to tell you what this program means to them, and specifically, with real specificity, what are you learning? What is it that you really appreciate about this? Where do you want to be better? What do you think you're good at? That sort of thing. These are folk who never get this opportunity in all likelihood, but for this fellowship. It's a very, very important decision that DASNY made, and I think it's a stellar decision. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So saying that, there's always a second act. I always believe that there's a second act. And this is important, and we felt that we wanted to have 1 year of this and really think about how we expand this. And so our next step is to create a fellowship program probably in our construction division and partner with the State University of New York. And then over time, we will combine both. We'll combine both programs, all right? So it will be a DASNY fellowship in finance and construction, but for both of the public institutions. And the reason why we're doing it that way is because we recognize that the partnerships that we have in terms of who we're working with, very frequently the student body that they are working with are not necessarily of the public institutions.
Yeah.
Right? And so we feel very strongly in terms of signaling to the marketplace that, number one, we're agents of New York State, and New York State is an excellent training ground, not just in the private realm, but in the public realm in terms of human capital and talent. And so that's very important. So we've put that flag in the ground, and we will go forward.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now turn things over to Portia, who will give us a market update.
Thank you, Gerard. Behind tab 11 are the standard public finance reports. Just briefly before we get to the market update, we proposed 2 transactions since the last board meeting, American Academy of Dramatic Arts and the new transaction that Gerard had talked about. As to the market, total new issue supply is currently about $50.5 billion year to date, which is about 19% higher than this time last year. Supply in the market this week is about $5.7 billion. U.S. government bonds are growing stronger, flight to quality. Lack of any news really surrounding U.S. and China relations, negotiations, and weaker economic data. Property municipal bonds are flat across the curve. We've seen continued inflows into the municipal market. This marks about the 6th week of consecutive inflows. MMD has decreased 4, 6, and 5 basis points respectively since the February board meeting. I'd just like to briefly draw the members' attention to there's a credit enhancement report behind the standard public finance reports, again behind tab 11. We do this report each year, and basically, the key takeaways I think are very consistent as to what we've seen in previous years. On the first page of the report, if you look at, this is basically showing what the credit enhancement looks like for our portfolio of our not-for-profit portfolio. So the first page is really showing that with respect to our outstanding bonds, the fixed rate portfolio continues to grow while the variable rate portfolio continues to decline. The other key takeaway is that the percentage of unenhanced bonds And unenhanced private placement bonds continues to grow. And I think that's, no real big surprise given the nature of the transactions that we've seen come to the board over the course of the last year. Page 2 of the report just details out the type of credit enhancement and the specific providers for the various portfolio. And the last report, the last page of the report shows the our private clients together with their letter of credit renewal dates for 2019, as well as a look into future years. The one last thing that I'd like to just bring to the members' attention, Gerard talked about this earlier in terms of what DASNY and, each month, I think we've tried to keep you up to date on various outreach efforts to our clients. The other thing that we're doing is also reaching out to our various partners, including the investment banks. We continue to do so. We met recently with UBS. We also talked to Morgan Stanley, again, to sort of reinforce the kinds of changes that we've made under One DASNY. As you know, Gerard had hosted a pretty large gathering back at the end of the summer talking about the changes to our guidelines, but a lot of what we're doing really speaks to changing our processes and the way in which we're kind of working with both the clients and the third-party professionals in the working process, things that we're doing in terms of working with the Department of Health. And so we've been bringing the bankers up to date on those issues as well. So we continue to do sort of a multi-pronged outreach effort, again, both with the clients as well as the third-party professionals. And we'll keep you posted on those efforts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Portia, thank you. Thank you. On Friday, February 15th, Governor Andrew Cuomo announced 30-day amendments to the fiscal year 2020 executive budget and changes to the fiscal year 2020 executive budget financial plan. The 30-day amendments included technical corrections to the proposal to expand DASNY and other state entities' ability to use design, build, and other alternative project delivery methods, including construction manager at risk and construction manager build. It also added the State University Construction Fund to the alternative project delivery proposal. Revisions in the financial plan include a $3.8 billion downward reestimate to personal income tax collections over 2 years, including a reduction of $2.6 billion in fiscal year 2019 and $1.2 billion in fiscal year 2020. Additionally, you have received in your workbooks updated budget documents which include the proposed DASNY operating budget for fiscal year 2020, a financial plan, and a resolution adopting the proposed operating budget. You have also been presented with a resolution confirming the current fee structure pursuant to which DASNY charges its private clients for services DASNY renders in connection with financing transactions. As you may recall, early on in our One DASNY examination of the conduit issuance business, we determined it best to defer reviewing and considering changes to DASNY's financing fee structure until after we completed our examination of the financing process and implemented any changes to the process. We are now prepared to begin reviewing the financing fee structure. I have established a staff working group and directed the group to review our fee structure and consider whether changes would better serve our clients, position DASNY as a long-term strategic partner, and further DASNY's public service mission. I will update the board as this work progresses. I will now turn things over to Kim Nadell, who will present to you the proposed 2019-2020 operating budget. If the chair will permit, you will have an opportunity to vote on the fees resolution following her presentation.
Thank you, Gerard. As Gerard mentioned, you do have in your materials an updated proposed budget and a cover memo summarizing some changes that we made to the budget. Those changes reflect our most recent payroll data, as well as our recruiting assumptions through the end of the fiscal year. Also reflects some updated estimates related to the new field office and data center that we have in Rochester. Have some refinements to the next year's budgets. All in, the proposed budget changed by just $32,000 since our review in January. We also have changed the projected for the current fiscal year earnings. They are down approximately $500,000 from what we were projecting earlier in the year, and our estimate going into the new fiscal year is up by about the same amount, and that is largely because of 4 transactions on the private client financing side that shifted slightly, moving them out of the current fiscal year into next fiscal year. So the proposed budget now would have us at essentially break even for the upcoming fiscal year. Before we do look to have you vote on the budget, just want to review some of the key assumptions that we have. Overall, the operating expenditures are approximately $118 million for the upcoming fiscal year. It reflects our salaries. Salaries have gone up by $1.6 million over the current projected year-end numbers. As you recall, we are retaining the budgeted full-time equivalent level at 529 FTEs for the upcoming fiscal year. That's the same as the budget for this year. We are currently projecting to end this fiscal year at 519 FTEs. Benefits also increased. They went up by approximately $1.2 million. That reflects a 3% increase in health insurance premiums, and that's due to both rate increases as well as increase in participation. We have higher Social Security taxes and contributions for retirements. That's based on recent information that we received from the employee retirement system. Those reflect higher salaries that I mentioned earlier as part of the budget. The financing side of the house, we, as I said, had 4 transactions that moved into next year, so those are reflected in the budget, as well as we had originally proposed in the early materials 3 additional private client financings over the current year projection. When you take those into account, as I just mentioned, we are projecting this year to end the year at approximately a $1 million surplus, and for the budgeted fiscal year for 1920, we will be essentially break even. Does anyone have any questions?
Kim, I had one. The 3% increase in health insurance premiums, this is an unfair question and I apologize, but is that consistent with with increases in recent years? 3%?
Oh, that's lower than we have seen in the last several years, where we have been seeing 6-7% rate increases. So this year we are seeing a much lower level of rate increases.
Great. Thank you. I'm sorry, Paul?
No questions, but I just wanted to thank Kim. I took her up on her offer to ask questions offline. I bugged her on what was probably a very busy day, and I thank you for taking the time to elucidate some of the more nuanced points of the budget.
My pleasure.
And just as a reminder, of course, the members are invited at any time to contact staff directly with questions about anything, anything that pops up for you. Please don't hesitate to call staff to talk about those things. Well, there being no questions, no further questions, you've all had a chance to review the resolution. It appears in your books. It is proposed DASNY operating budget in the amount of $182,162,559. May I have a motion, please, to approve the budget?
Are we voting on the fees or the budget?
Just the budget. Yeah. I assume there's a second resolution on fees. Okay, good. May I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution? Wellington, thank you. Is there a second? Farrell, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye.
There being no objection, the motion carries unanimously and the resolution is approved. Take us through the fee structure. Question.
But as Gerard had mentioned, we are not proposing any changes to the fee structure for this year. We had proposed increases back in 2017. We are going to have a working group to revisit those fees, but for the moment, get to the right page, our fees are remaining at $125,000 for a private client, $200,000 when they are complex deals. And we adjust our administrative fees based on the amount of debt outstanding on an annual basis. So as our clients pay down their debt, their administrative fees go down. The rates are slightly higher in the first couple of years because of increased effort on staff's part, because we process a lot of construction reimbursement for the new money projects. When there isn't new money involved, then the lower rates are applied from the beginning of the financing.
Kim, thank you. That resolution appears directly behind the resolution that you just approved. It's essentially 3.5 pages. You've had a chance to review it. Are there any questions about the resolution itself?
Well, if I could just ask a question generally. So we revised the fees
2017.
Okay. And so the notion is we're approving no changes.
Continuation of the same fees.
But based on the one DASNY initiative, now that there's been some time to absorb that and see how that's working, then over the coming year, there's going to be a reassessment of the fee structure in light of that new learning. And
we have been reassessing our fee structure for many years, and we understood that we needed to do something. We had to do something in 2017. We did that, but with the changes the more advanced changes that we recently put forth, we just felt that it's important to go back and look at it again. Right? So look at it in the context of a lot of different things, right? So transfer funding has gone away. There's a lot of nuances, and so it's just a fresh look at it, and we'll come back. We might change it, we may not, but that's.
We did a lot in 17. We
did.
Right.
It was a pretty substantial.
It was substantial.
Made sense. Just.
Yep. It was substantial, but there may be some fine tuning that we want to do, or not. But I think it's important. I think one of the things that we have continued to learn as we look at every process, as we look at everything we do, we have to have a continuous lens, or a lens of continuous improvement. So, okay, how good is this now with all of the changes? Because we still have, many folks have alternatives. But we still have to, we still have freight that we have to cover here. So.
The resolution is self-explanatory. It's, I think, pretty clear. Are there other questions about it, however? Hearing none, may I have a motion, please, to approve? Darrell, thank you. Gerard, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. 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 It appears the motion carries unanimously. The resolution is approved. Kim, since you're on deck already, your material for this meeting appears behind tab 14. Are there additions that you'd like to make in the meeting?
Thank you, Al. I don't have any additions.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. President.
Okay. On Tuesday, March 19th, DASNY will be celebrating Women's History Month by hosting a women's leadership event, driving change and getting results for women who are building New York. The event will be held at the Fashion Institute of Technology, Eddie Murphy Amphitheater from 6 to 8 p.m. and feature an interview with FIT President Dr. Joyce F. Brown. A panel of extraordinary women who are leaders in their fields will immediately follow. The panel will be moderated by Cornelia Kale, a partner at Barclay Damon, and include Kim Arnone, Head of Municipal Finance at Jeffries, Cheryl McKissick Daniel, President and CEO of McKissick and McKissick, Suzanne Shank, Chairwoman, CEO, and co-founder, Seberg Cisneros Shank, Elizabeth Velez, President and Chief Contract Administrator, Velez Organization. That concludes my remarks.
I'll add to the last remark. I had a brief conversation with Connie Kale, who was here this morning. They had, this group of women had their first telephone meeting yesterday.
I didn't conclude my remarks. Sorry.
She says it's a top shelf group of people, and she's looking forward to moderating.
Oh, it's going to be exciting.
Yeah,
It
sounds like it will be.
We had interesting conversation yesterday and last week, so
Good.
I think the buzz is happening.
Good.
And last thing that's very important. On Thursday, February the 7th, DASNY, the State University of New York, and the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, announced the start of the first zero-net carbon-ready retrofit project on a SUNY campus. DASNY is managing the design and
We
construction.
didn't do
of the
that
project.
yet. That's tomorrow. It's tomorrow, so.
February the 7th.
Oh, February. I
February
said
the
March.
7th. February the 7th. The project involves renovating SUNY Anianto's Ford Hall, a residence hall that houses approximately 300 students. The renovations will make Ford Hall zero net carbon ready, meaning that it will exceed existing energy codes and be ready to use off-site renewable energy sources as they become available. The project is the first of its kind for the SUNY Residence Hall program and will serve as proof of concept, demonstrating that an affordable, quality residence hall renovation can achieve zero net carbon performance. And we had the benefit yesterday of meeting with the Chancellor of SUNY as well as her senior member team to highlight the importance of this from where we sit and how we want to support her initiatives as well as the goals that the governor has put forth for the state. So this is hugely important for her. And she was very excited to hear of the work that we are doing. Certainly at SUNY, Poly, and Utica, as well as Fort Hall and Oneonta, and trying to figure out where are there other opportunities for us to execute on this. So it's an exciting time.
When we work on, when these things for zero net carbon ready processes and costs and all the work is done, ready to use off-site renewable energy sources. How do we plug into that the true costs of the off-site renewable project, where the cost per kilowatt is substantially higher?
Well, I'll leave that to Steve.
Zero net if you increase the electric costs.
Well,
That's what I want to know.
So two things. The Poly project is a net zero energy project. All the infrastructure will be built into the project. At some future point in time, there will be additional projects that supply, the energy to that building. So that project, I don't know what the future costs look like for those additional projects that are coming online, but we've done our best to price in the infrastructure that goes into our project today. So I think it's a very good question, but it's a tough one to answer. On the Fort Hall project, which is a renovation project, we've already got the building there. It's even more difficult because we are going to do what we need to do to get that project again ready for some future investment in energy supply. So it's a good question. It's really tough to answer. I think it can only be answered at some future point in time when we realize what those costs are going to be to bring those other projects on board.
So the question's asked, but not quite answered.
Well, because
You'll
it
know
really,
better later on.
we're not going to really know whether we've accomplished anything until we find out what the cost of electricity is.
and the transformation that's underway in New York. And you can get as many projections on the cost of electricity in 2030 as you'd like. But
Who knows what it,
that's
today,
right.
who knows?
So the real question in 2030 or 2040 is going to be, was the investment in 2020 worthwhile? Was it? Have we gotten anything out of this?
Agreed.
Agreed, but, I mean, the idea is to offset these costs, and they can be done incrementally over time, right? They're amortized over time, so, you know, you're gonna factor in that some of those costs are gonna jump on you, and so what else will you offset? Those are valid points, but it's a longer-term view.
I think the concept is good, right? I mean, we want to invest today, and at some point in time, there'll be a return on that investment. How long that time takes, we can't answer because of your question. What are the costs going to be associated with future energy costs? You know, so it's a good question. Theoretically, you know, this will be a win.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. I mean, you know, there's no question there's operational costs to run a building, right? We're trying to drive those to zero. What's it going to cost to do that? I don't know.
But there is data that shows that there are institutions that do this, and there are savings generated. There is data. Obviously, you know, when you leap into the future yourself, right, you're standing on your own 2 feet, so we accept that. But there is a sufficient amount of data that shows that you can generate cost savings.
Unless I misunderstand it, I mean, there are two elements of this. There's the retrofitting the building in a manner that is going to reduce the energy costs regardless of the source of that energy. And so you have to do an analysis of what the savings versus the cost of the retrofit. And then there's simply, the cost of the renewable energy going forward. But to me, that's a different, I mean, whether you're plugging in electricity generated by coal or by wind, it doesn't impact it impacts the costs for the building, doesn't impact anything else about the building, right?
I think on the project we're doing down at Oneonta, which is a rehab project, there's certainly upfront cost. We would have done a gut rehab project there regardless, right? But what we're doing is we're doing a gut rehab project, and we're adding to that additional sources of energy generation. It doesn't get us to the goal.
And also conservation, right?
Yeah.
Well, they probably
exactly.
spray foam or something.
But it doesn't get us to the goal. The ultimate goal is to drive it to zero. We can't do that on a renovation project. So there's going to be, at some future point in time, some plugins, whether we add, solar panels off-site and provide electricity to the building that way, or some other generation of energy. The costs associated with those projects, though, are unknown. So when you look at what the payback's going to be, are we actually achieving the goal? We might be achieving the goal of getting to net zero. The building is generating enough of its own, electricity to run the building, but at what cost? And how long is the payback? And those are the questions that are swirling around in everyone's mind. So it's, these will be projects that are ready to plug in, which is unlike any projects we do today. But the payback and how soon we get there, those are still questions we're asking. There's a steep learning curve. I mean, the building community this is new to the building community. There's not manufacturers out there manufacturing what we're proposing to do on this Ford Hall. We're going to have to look long and hard for materials to go into this building, this renovation project. But I liken it to LEED. The LEED approach 10 years ago, where everybody scratched their head and said, how much is that going to cost? And today we really don't talk about it. We just kind of do it. So I don't know if we're 10 years out, with that analogy, but there's going to be a huge learning curve. There's going to be cost associated with it. Hopefully at the end of the day, it all makes sense.
But, any kind of financial analysis requires assumptions. So
this is no different, except it's environmentally related, which has other potential benefits. But it doesn't matter whatever your philosophy on it. We always plug in financial assumptions.
Yeah.
They work out or they don't, but.
And in reality, the market will tell us when we go to market with this Ford Hall project. It'll tell us what the costs are.
Yeah, that's right.
Tell you what your costs are and the
Exactly
offsets.
right.
Yeah.
I hadn't actually had a
We've made assumptions, but who knows if they're
So
right.
then you readjust.
Right.
Right, you readjust.
And you continually readjust.
Right, and readjust when you get your payback.
Yeah.
If you think it's 10 years and it actually turns out to be 13 years, you're gonna have to do it.
Again, the cost to do a lead building today, we don't even think about it. 10 years ago, everybody was nervous about the design cost associated with doing a lead building, the construction premium to do a lead building. It's kind of built in at this point. Afterthought.
Well, sir, you've got the floor. Why don't you give us your report?
Alrighty. Behind tab 12 are the three standard construction division reports. The first report, the construction projects report on the cover, is a project that we worked on at LaGuardia Community College. It's the Goldman Sachs Small Business Education Center. This is a renovation project intended to provide the opportunity for small business owners to learn the tools to grow their businesses. The renovation design reflects the atmosphere and setting of international businesses. Materials, details, and technology throughout the space are found in corporate offices throughout the world. The renovation project consisted of the construction of 9 office spaces, a waiting area, a reception and entry space, a full-wall media display, 80-inch diagonal touchscreen monitors viewable from mobile devices, classrooms with recordable capability, 4 breakaway rooms with movable partitions, copy room, storage room, pantry, IT room, and mechanical spaces. Overall, approximately 10,000 square feet of space was renovated. This is right within one of our community campuses. LaGuardia Community College. The budget was $5 million. The design consultant was APA Architects. Design started in January of 2016 and completed in March of 2017. Our general contractor was Vanguard Construction. They began construction in August of 17 and completed in December of 18. This project was created under the New York CUNY 2020 Challenge Grant Program. This was a program to incentivize economic development driven by CUNY campuses in areas of their academic strength. Got a couple photos. I'll just pass around the space. I was there a couple weeks ago. It's Class A. Really nice space. On page 3, we have added 4 new projects to our list. We have a fuel tank decommissioning project at City College for $11.4 million. We have a grad center big data consortium project. This is actually adding some new space to the library concourse area of the grad school for $6.1 million. We have a 3rd floor renovation at Hostos Community College. This is the 3rd single floor renovation that we're doing in an occupied space, $11.8 million. And the NYPI roof replacement project for $7.5, so a total of $36.8 million in new projects. On page 8, construction expenditures. Prior fiscal year to date, we were at $738 million. Current fiscal year to date, $596 million. That's a change of $142 million year over year. Just a couple of project and program updates at South Beach Site Center, our largest project in construction today. Project continues to progress with building enclosure nearing completion. Also interior framing, MEP work, sheetrock, elevators, and fire life safety trades are progressing. Substantial completion remains in early October of this year. Our executive meeting, our next one is scheduled for Thursday, March 14th, and we continue to meet with the general contractor to discuss construction issues on behalf of OMH. Gerard noted the Life Sciences Lab project. We have shortlisted the 3 DVPs and issued the RFP. We're working today on finalizing the contract language, and we'll issue the contract to the teams as an addendum to the RFP as well. Over at FIT, the projects, the C-squared project, the redesign effort continues. We've reached 30% schematic design on the redesign. At this time, the architects, CMs, and DASNY's estimators are pricing the project with this effort completing at the end of this month. The results of the estimating exercise and eventual reconciliation will dictate the direction of the project. At SUNY, we continue to gear up for the new capital renovation and new build projects, as well as the 30 summer projects. Pre-construction activities continue on most all of these projects at this time, and construction for all projects will start around May 15th. On the Javits Center, work continues on the expansion project, including structural steel erection, reinforced concrete parking garage work, and the completion of deep foundation work. In addition, the work at the transformer building is wrapping up, and TAO meetings have begun as the project seeks occupancy later this summer. DASNY is also reviewing plans at this time for a fire alarm upgrade to the existing Javits Center. Over at Moynihan, demolition and heavy civil renovation work continues. Work also continues on vertical transportation, MEP systems, the skylights, and the building exterior. DASNY continues our role as permitting agency and continues our full-time on-site presence overseeing the renovation program. And lastly, with Gozer, we met with Gozer in February to discuss the movement of our projects, the project's budgets, and the end of the program timeline restraints. DASNY is reviewing our project estimates and will feed the same to Gozer, allowing for prioritization of projects moving forward. And just a couple of other quick notes. We had a CUNY retreat on February 20th. Gerard, Mike Stabulos, Jerry Cohen, Paul Koopman, Matt Moore, and myself met with CUNY's senior level construction execs to discuss our partnership and our desire to efficiently move projects through our process. We had a number of takeaways, and we were pursuing those takeaways as well as CUNY. CUNY had a number as well, and we're pursuing those as ways to keep these projects moving in an efficient manner. Last Thursday, we were down at the Bronx Psych Center with OMH doing a lessons learned exercise. We had the project's architects, CMs, consultants, and OMH facility staff there to just do a debrief on any lessons learned from the project. It was a really great meeting. We took a lot away. We've already brought some of those lessons learned to the South Beach project, and we'll continue to do the same for future OMH projects. Gerard mentioned the SUNY Chancellor meeting. And next week we have a meeting with OMH on a 250-bed forensic hospital project at Mid-Hudson, where we'll present our project approach. OMH is considering both DASNY and OGS for the project. And that concludes my report.
Steve, thank you.
What is that price between like OGS and DASNY?
Say again?
How does it price? Like, what's the price comparison between OGS and DASNY doing the job?
Well, are you talking about the construction, or are you talking about our
just the
fee?
the fee.
We haven't worked up our fee. I don't know where OGS comes in, although I think DASNY needs more fee for services than OGS in their model, but I don't think it's a fee-based discussion, frankly. I think it's more of a
time, quality, and
I think it's a qualifications-based discussion. You know, what can we do? What can they do? We've done a lot of the major OMH projects on most of the campuses across the state, so I think we'll fare okay.
And Moynihan's looking good. I know we just have but it's sort of advancing. You can see it every month.
Actually, Gerard's going to be out there next Thursday on the 14th if anybody wants to tag along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll hop along for that ride.
Okay, we'll set you up.
When is it?
Thursday at 11 o'clock. Next Thursday.
It's quite.
Yeah, no, I see it. It's
quite a walkthrough. I mean,
it's
the work
a challenging project. It's
at a level.
A long way.
I mean, it's beyond anything we've ever done. It's something else.
If you're interested, let me know. We'll set you up. So don't do what I did when I went through, I went to Javits. So I had some suede shoes on that.
Oh, yeah.
I had to give a speech at someplace else,
Yeah.
and it was the worst day out. And when I got there, there was a bucket of water there, and I said, boy, did I pick the wrong day to wear these shoes. You were there, right? He was there.
Put my own hard hat. It's okay.
You got your I had the hard hat, but you know, I didn't have the right footwear. So, okay, that's a project. That is
I'm not going to say that.
But let me know, please. We'll accommodate whoever would like to go.
Steve, thanks for a very thorough report. Other questions for Steve before we move on? Then we're going to go to tab 13 for the General Counsel's report. Before we give you a report, there is a governance matter
Yes.
which we did not address.
As we were going into executive session, I realized that, and I have to go back and just correct one thing. Although there are no changes recommended to the mission statement and metrics, we do have to vote, and there is a resolution in the packet. With the board's permission, I'd say that resolution is ready to go. We recommend it, and if we agree, then I'll go back and chronologically put it where it belongs and amend the remarks that I made.
Terrific. May I have a motion, please, to approve the resolution? Gerard, thank you. Paul, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. The motion carries unanimously. The resolution is approved. Thank you, sir. Got it. Okay, now, you have, is there anything to report outside of what I will suggest is an executive session?
No, we'll do the litigation update in executive session.
Okay, then, may I have a motion, please, to go into executive session for all the reasons I read for the first executive session and that I didn't read for the second executive session? They are identical. May I have a motion? Thank you, Wellington. Tracy, thank you very much. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. We are in executive session. Tell me who's in the room and who's not.
Hold on.
Larry, do you want to?
The members have just left executive session, returned to public session. During that executive session, no decisions were made other than to return to executive session. Is there any other business to come before this board? There being none, may I have a motion, please, to adjourn this meeting? Bill, thank you. Paul, thank you for the second. All in favor, please indicate with aye. Aye. As there are none opposed, we are adjourned.
Thank you.